you know, premised on this whole idea is that there will be increased consumption. Like the only way you're not going to have a high inflation is if there's increased consumption. I don't mean to get too economics heavy, making you pull out the formula. I know the formula, but I'm working under different assumptions. And because we have different assumptions, then the outcome is going to be different. So how does that really play out?
So again, the point that I wanted to mention here is, and again, it's not about using formulas. The reason I reached this conclusion because that's the first concern I had with basic income when I started researching it. And I started looking at research on how inflation works, and I was looking for research done that's by people who are not proponent of basic income, but just studying how the economic model works. And then when I found out the proposals that are made by proponents of basic income, I found that exist in economic science. Again, I'm not an economist. I did study a lot of economics, and I can share where I basically I can share the couple of articles where I learned about this in a specific video where it explains exactly how inflation works. But let me be clear, if it is inflationary at a level becomes hyperinflation, no proponent of UBI would support it.
Oh no. I'm not saying it would be rapidly inflationary. I'm just saying it would just reproduce where we are right now. That's not necessarily rapidly inflationary.
Well, as I said, this is inaccurate based on what I've mentioned earlier. I will share a video and maybe we can have a look at it at a later stage. But I want to also mention something that, as I said, I support the job guarantee. I think it's a great federal job guarantee. It's a great proposal, would be fantastic. The only challenge that we have here is that you still have a situation where there are people who want to do training, to basically take a year off to study. And unfortunately, with the good thing with UBI is that you're able to basically take the year off, focus on your studies, or focus on the specific skill set that you need to have so that you're able to reach that goal. With a guarantee, with a job guarantee, unfortunately, if you leave your job to study, you run out of income and you will have to go back to welfare.
Well, number one, I would make the argument that anybody that's going for educational purposes, that would be considered a job and be given a wage stipend. And that's what I meant when I said people who can work and people whose situations do not lend themselves to working. If you're a student gathering skills for some job that you want to do, then obviously a stipend can be given. Same thing if you're elderly, same thing if you're disabled. This is for people who are able-bodied and are working and are not doing nothing else. This is so that they will have an income. And we're not talking about, all these jobs being at the very bottom and it just being the bottom of the barrel. No. I'm envisioning an actual infrastructure where the federal jobs guarantee people with skills or people that stay in the job or things of that nature can move up. There's always need for administration for these types of things. That can be a job. These are things that, you can create an entire class of people working in the federal sector, providing goods and services that we need.
But
and doesn't necessarily have to be, a kid flipping burgers. He can either do this or do the federal job guarantee. It's not going to be a menial job.
But just to note that the MMT theorists, which are the ones that are strongly support the job guarantee, they note that those jobs have to be of less incentive for the employee for those employees, because the idea of job guarantee, unless you are looking for a different variant of it, which I'll be interested to know, basically that if they are not incentivized to go back into the private sector, there could be a situation where they will be taking a lot of people from the private sector going back into that, what is supposed to be a temporary job guarantee, to ensure that they have the necessary income until the economy is available. So I would like to know what variant are you looking at?
No. See, I'm not even picturing it as some sort of unemployment measure. This is going to be, if you want to work for the public sector, providing public goods to people, this will be a career, and it will compete with the private sector for talent, and it will change the way the actual job sector actually works. The private sector will be forced to compete with talent with the public sector, and it'll raise the standards across the board, all the way through the distribution. And that's the way I see the federal job guarantee. Not some kind of, we just want to make sure you have a job kind of deal.
Right. So I'd like to decouple that if you don't mind. So first of all, in terms of having job programs where it actually generates real jobs, for example, infrastructure, building trains, building bridges, and just examples. Of course, there are many other types of jobs. That job program can exist in any environment. You don't need a job guarantee program. You don't need the UBI. Whenever there is a need that the federal government and the public sector could provide, then I'm a proponent for it. But what we are talking here about those who are looking for a job and unable to find a job, unless we are assuming that the government can always guarantee that there will be a good available job for every single person. What happens in a case where someone is not doing a decent job? What happens in a case where someone is slacking off? For example, Grigory, what's his name, Yavlinsky, of a famous economist in Russia, he said that they had a job guarantee. Of course, the communists, like communism in the Soviet Union, wasn't optimal at best, but basically there was a situation where the system was not working because people were not working. There was no incentive to work. So it is important to have that incentive, and part of the incentive, as much as I hate to say it, is that if you don't do your job, you'll get fired. So how would the job guarantee address this issue?
Well, first off, I don't think that would be an issue. There's a culture in America, a culture of work, and a culture of both sense of community and sense of duty. Like, I believe that if we structure it properly, when you're talking about people that had no incentive to work, those are people that didn't want to work jobs that they just hated doing. They didn't enjoy their work. They didn't see the benefits of their work. And what I'm proposing is where we have communities that have some sort of ability to kind of shape the jobs that they need in their areas to serve what the public needs. So if you need somebody to take out the garbage, yes, it may not be a glorious job, but it's something that needs to be done. And serving your community, there would be some dignity in it. Of course, because it's harder to attract people to those type of jobs that people don't like, there could be better benefits. There could be higher pay, just like the private sector does, to attract people into those roles. And at the same time, if you can't fulfill the role, you can be moved into something else, provided that you don't have a satisfactory performance. Right? Like, obviously, if somebody doesn't show up to work every day, they're not supposed to keep getting paid. There's people that can show up to work, but there's also going to be people that, hey, try to figure out, why is this person not showing up to work? Why does he not do as good a job as he can? Perhaps he should be doing something else. Maybe there are people that are kind of figuring out, okay, this person is good at this. Maybe they can do something in this area or that area. There's a whole infrastructure that can go into a federal job guarantee. And what I think you're doing is you're limiting it to some sort of unemployment measure. And I don't think it has to be that. I think it can be a large infrastructure that will provide goods that the private sector just doesn't provide at all. Like, there are entire industries that the private sector just doesn't serve, that we can have served in doing things, particularly in things like the arts, particularly in things like sociology, teaching people about how to think, enriching people, planting trees, whatever it can be. You can have a job that does it and it pays a decent wage. And then, of course, good benefits, pensions, time off, family leave, all of these things. And guess what? Because that exists, the private sector now has to say, okay, if they're giving all that over there, we have to change what we give.
Right. And again, but I just want to note that this is not so much about what typically the job guarantee, federal guarantee, typically asks for, and that's fine. It's a form of a variant. But I do want to note a couple of things. What you're looking for is what Marxism initially has always proposed, is that the population reaches a level of what's the word? A desire to perform work not for the sake of just having a job, and just not for the sake of just um, basically going from 9 to 5 and doing whatever they need to do, but in fact actually producing for the economy. And even if they have a different type of job than somebody else, that they will be satisfied with that role. And places like Norway and Sweden are looking into community type of job guarantee in that format. But I do want to note a couple of things. They think about something that has not been discussed at this point is that the role of automation. So, for example, there's 35% of all jobs are expected to be 38%, to correct myself, of all U.S. jobs are expected to go to be replaced with robots. 35% in other places around the world. Also, McKinsey Global Institute has identified at least 12 new technologies that are disrupting how jobs are currently being done. And we currently have skilled people, including teachers and trainers, that are finding that their jobs are being replaced by essentially robots. So the idea of the UBI give someone the ability and the flexibility of adjusting to those new changes in the economy, so that if their role is no longer possible, it's hard to ask someone, hey, you know what, you spent 18 years studying this specific, or let's say 4 years studying this specific skill set, you have to change. You have to give them the means to do so, and the UBI is the best conduit to allow for that continuously changing dynamic.
Okay, again, I think the federal job guarantee does ensure those things. You're not going to have a robot teaching kids how to speak, or you're not going to have a robot teaching kids how to play guitar. You're not going to have a robot teaching children about philosophy. You know, these are not things that robots are traditionally doing. You know, these are things that people do. These are services that have to be done by human-to-human interactions. And then on top of that, to manage those things will also take humans. So you're right. As automation does replace industry, there's a whole bunch of places where you know, a federal job guarantee would allow us, the workforce, to have another place to go. Perhaps as we have things be so automated, perhaps there needs to be more oversight to make sure that, you know, these highly automated processes, without as much human interaction, that they're still ethical, that companies are still operating ethically. Now we need more auditors. Now we need more regulators to ensure that our food is safe. Like, these are things that humans will still have to do. And even if you enlist robots to help you do that, somebody needs to oversee the robots. So
someone has to build the robots.
Where I think the federal job guarantee is not necessarily weakened by automation. Automation is irrelevant, because no matter what happens, we will have things that we still need humans to do. And we will guarantee a human a job to do it. Now, let's say automation gets to the point where only a fraction of the population needs to work. Well, now we just experiment with job sharing. We will pay you the same amount, but now you work less and share your job with someone else, and so on, as much as you need to do. And these are the types of things that you can do. And guess what? If you're doing it in the public sector, you're paying more or paying the same and having individual people work less. Now the private sector has to do the same thing. That is the power of a federal job guarantee. You can coerce the private sector.
But hold on a second. About that coercion of the private sector, in fact, UBI is very strong at this point. And let me explain how. Let me give you an example. Currently, one of the main reasons that people are accepting extremely low wages, I mean, wages of $8 an hour or $9 an hour, because they don't have another option. With a UBI, where you're receiving a basic income, where you're not afraid that you're not going to be able to have your basic needs, you're able to negotiate and reject those. I'm just giving that example of you would able to negotiate and request for better, and not only better salaries, but better benefits And if that's not provided, then you could look into either opening your own company, because that does support that. It allows for entrepreneurship, something that job federal guarantee is not as keen on handling. You might have to mitigate that in one way or another. But it gives the negotiation, and it gives people the bargaining power to negotiate against companies and the private sector who is trying to exploit them.
Let me bring David in on this. David, what do you think? You're hearing us go back and forth here. And I think at a certain point, it gets to the point where we're kind of saying the same thing, and we're kind of just talking, around each other or over each other, not at each other or to each other. So, right. What would you have to say about this? I'm going to let you be the mediating force, so to speak.
Sure. I wrote down one question. I'll say a little bit before I ask it, though. What it strikes me about is that as Salam is sort of framing your discussion between the two of you, that the way that like economists or people who are experts on these ideas, who talk about them a lot, when they do bring up the federal jobs guarantee, is usually you're right that it's usually about mitigating unemployment rather than being some sort of overarching large-scale jobs program that sort of reshapes the way that Americans or whatever country or the world does work, is the way you're describing it, Nick. In terms of the thing that I'm interested in, that you think that the universal basic income is somehow lacking. You seem to be implying that work in and of itself is an inherent good. Do you believe that work is inherently meaningful and helpful to people and humans?
No, I don't. Okay. I believe that service to the community and producing goods and services for the community is something that we need, and we can use the federal job guarantee to get those things going. Work is not necessarily good or inherently evil. It just can be used to achieve things that society needs. So if you need a building built, while people don't like to work, people do like to have a place to stay. So, somebody has to do those things. And unless you get to a point where, robots have basically done everything and they do everything, then I just feel like a federal job guarantee is the best way to handle a changing world, and for people in society to decide, how they're going to aggregate things, how they're going to basically, divvy out jobs or decide what the community needs to be done.
And so what is inherently, how does in your mind, how does a universal basic income how does it not serve that same purpose?
Because it pays out money, but that money does not produce goods and services. It's just paid out without producing more goods and services. And there's no way to address the needs, the things that we need to have done that the private sector doesn't cover. The UBI just doesn't have an answer for that. It doesn't even seek to address how we do work. Really, it just kind of provides a pittance to everyone at a blanket level, but it'll just reproduce the same structures that were before it, with the UBI somehow subsidizing people at the bottom, or so to speak. Really, I don't even believe it'll subsidize. I believe it'll just provide an offset to the current positions of people, but not much else.
So what does Salam have to say?
So what I want to note here is that when you give people cash, it's called transfer in cash, you actually empower them to do anything. It should not be seen in any way that it will not lead to any benefit in terms of working or anything of that kind. People who, remember, this is a basic income. People still want to have more. They want to have the better iPhones. They want to have the better cars. They want to have bigger homes. People have that incentive to work more, but they will do it on their own accord, based on their own interest. And there was a study that was done. I know it was in Kenya, but in 2013, an MIT study, and it shows that when you have transfer in cash, that people actually do more with it. they start either building assets, they start building homes, or they are starting to feel the autonomy of deciding to do whatever they want to do with that money that belongs to them. And it should not be seen in any way that it is a throwaway. In fact, in terms of building that home, something that needs to be taken is about maximizing utility for the employees. For someone who is skilled in building, as long as you can maximize utility, not salary, utility, whether it's good benefits, a decent salary, a good working environment, people would enjoy and doing those specific things. And that is that applies to the private sector, that applies to the public sector. This is human nature.
Yeah, so I understand that, but the way prices work is what's to prevent. There's things that humans need that are commodities right now, and if you provide a subsidy to everyone uniformly, what's to prevent the prices of those commodities from rising to maintain things the way they are right now?
But as I mentioned, because that is, you are not printing. Let me put it in a different way, and I don't mean to get into too much into economics, but let's say, according to your argument, if you give everyone $10,000 more, then prices will go up because now there is more basically demand. And you could just say, hey, well, now everything will go up, end of story. The problem is that there wouldn't be enough currency in the economy. Is that whenever you talk about inflation, it is related to the amount of money that is being printed. So if I take away from you $10 and put it in my pocket, there will be no inflation. But if I'm going to get an additional $10, then yes, that is an inflation. That's how I want to describe it.
Okay, so let me explain to you
the
this.
idea is that you're taking from one to the other. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you this though. I'm not. What you're talking about is not necessarily, in a redistributive scheme. There are people who have stocks and stocks of $10, and if you take $10 from them that was sitting idle and not in circulation, and then you give it to somebody and they spend it, you have now increased circulation. And you've provided an inflation. That is inflation.
That's the same applies. The same applies with federal job guarantee, because those people that will be spending that money are those that are of lower income. So those with the federal guarantee, what it would do is that it would give people who would have specific income would now have that income. Basically the poverty.
But here's the difference.
The lower class will now have new money that they will be circulating into the economy. And the same story,
but here's the difference.
Same story goes.
Here's the difference. In my scheme, I'm also producing more goods. I'm increasing output. They're not getting that money without producing output. They're putting out some sort of output, goods and services that were not being had before. So now we're producing new goods. So it counters inflation.
I disagree, because with UBI, what you just said right now is that the moment you say is that there is an increase in the velocity of money, the moment you put it back into the economy, the moment you stimulate it, you produce more output. There is more demand. Therefore,
there is more demand, but wait.
But it's the same.
Just because there's more demand does not mean that more supply will be automatically given. As long as individuals control supply, they can decide to just charge more for the same thing. They don't have to because produce more output.
No, 1 second. What I'm trying to say is that if you start buying more, people who would have, for example, let me give an example. If before a family bought one iPhone, now they buy two. Okay, so this is more output. What
if there's only one? What if there's not another one? Now we just charge
there will be
because there's more money in circulation.
No, that's not how it works. Like again, I think we're going back into that circle. If, as I said, if it is,
you're making the assumption that suppliers will provide more goods. I'm saying they won't necessarily do so.
All I'm saying is that the same story goes with federal.
Well, not if the supplier is the federal government providing goods and services that people purchase.
It's not. It's paying you a wage. and buy that second iPhone. Remember, the government
But what
does
did they do
not
to get that wage,
generate.
though? They worked. They produced something.
Okay, but
Those
okay,
things that
now
they're
I want to talk
producing.
about something. Since you said I didn't touch on an area, and I think you just put yourself in that position. So thank you. I appreciate it. The point I want to say is that you're making an assumption here that, and I feel it's somewhat of a utopia, that to argue that every position available that's provided as part of federal guarantee will be productive. In fact, a very large percentage of our current jobs today are not very productive or not productive at all.
Well,
so we have to be very.
So now we
it's
start
hard
arguing
to
about what's
argue.
productive and what's not. And I don't disagree with you. There are a lot of jobs that aren't productive, but I believe that if we shape it correctly, a large number of those jobs can be productive.
Again, and everything is possible. The thing is that what is practical, right? There will always be a situation where some jobs will be productive and other jobs will not be productive. And unfortunately, this will lead to waste. As I said, the beauty of the UBI is that it gives people the power to do whatever they want. If they want to be artists.
I think when you give somebody a UBI, basically you've given somebody something that everybody has, and then you've basically lowered its value, because there's nothing saying just because you have a UBI means you can still eat. Just because you have a UBI means you'll still have a place to stay. Those things are rationed by scarcity, and scarcity means that the person who has the most money gets it when there's a scarcity. I'm saying your solution of a UBI has not addressed the fact that we have to make more goods.
Okay, I think we're going around in circles. I just want to summarize a couple of things. The reasons that I like UBI is that it's simple, cost. I'd like to, and I think one thing that is of great importance to me personally is that it takes away the stigma of requesting. Unfortunately, I believe that those who have to ask or to request for those guarantees, the moment that there is an eligibility requirement, then there will be a form of stigma. Unfortunately, the culture, especially from the right-wing media, so it takes away that stigma, which I think is great. The third thing is that, and I need to note, if you'll disagree with me here, but in terms of, there are many articles that have clarified why UBI will not be inflationary. And this is why many economists have supported that view. That will be, and the very last thing is that I just want to mention that people who just receive what's called transfers in cash in terms of form of money actually do more, as a study that was done by MIT in 2013 has shown. So I'll and just to close the discussion, at least for my end, and I'll turn it over to you, is that an opponent of the federal job guarantee, and I am a supporter of it, and I will continue to support it. But in having a situation where you have between Utopia A and Utopia B, my Utopia is for the UBI. Over to you, Nick.
David, do you have anything to say there? Did you have any questions? Because like you said.
Just reacting to what Salam just said, that although you've brought up some questions that I need to answer and look into as Salam is pointing about these things, that if I was going to choose the utopia of the future, that I would much rather, as a person, have resources available to me when I needed them, so that I could do whatever I decided was best for me and my community, rather than have some. So basically, the UBI seems to me more like something that I would rather have than a job guarantee, because a job guarantee would mean having. If we're assuming some world that is, I much more prefer the lack of that governmental thing. just personally. The UBI is just like, okay, everyone gets their food and their housing and all their things.
Well, that's not what it
I understand. I'm just saying that I'm extending the idea out in order to sort of frame my thought, right? Because obviously neither of these things is anything as drastic as I'm describing. It's the sort of a Chomskyan person in me who would prefer less people making other people making decisions for me. That the UBI seems to have less of that than a jobs guarantee would. But and again, of course, in our real actual world where we have hegemonic power deciding what we do most of the time by rich people, that either of these things would, in my mind, make our society a whole shit ton better either way.
Okay. So I'll make some closing arguments, and I'll lay off the inflation binge because you know what, inflation is largely still understood. It's not largely understood all the way 100%, right? Prices has like there's an expectation. There's a random factor in human interaction that kind of makes it a little fuzzy there. So, but here's what I was gonna say. The federal job guarantee, in my mind, if I were to choose my utopia, it would be one where, number one, there's a sense of community, right? Like you live with other people, like you service the community. You all communally work together to do something, like to make it work. And I think a federal job guarantee, if implemented right, with communal control and not some kind of bureaucratic control, right, like overarching, can achieve those goals towards, basically marshaling communal resources to achieve communal means or achieve communal ends that the community has decided for themselves they want to accomplish. And while at the same time providing employment and sense of community to everybody that's living in the area. Now, of course, these are high ideals, right? This is my utopia. But I believe that even if we talk about things like automation and things of that nature, that those things can be accommodated with the federal jobs guarantee. And also at the same time, we have the ability to begin to upturn some of the power and control that the private industry has over many things. Like just the federal jobs guarantee just gives you that ability. It gives a lot more power to people versus the corporate sector. And I think that that's absolutely needed. It also shows a different way of thinking about work that can compete with the dominating concept of work that's out now, which is the corporate version. And I think those things, as far as challenging thought and as far as transforming society into something a little bit different from what we have now, speak to why the federal jobs guarantee is a lot more potent a solution. And I will tell you that you have a lot of media sensation, you have a lot of neoliberals and a lot of people that are traditionally in favor of things that are oppressive. They seem to be about the UBI, and I would tell you there's something that they understand about it that we don't, and that is that if they did it, the system itself is largely unchanged. In many ways, the way employers and employees will interact with one another, to me, it remains largely unchanged. Whereas the federal jobs guarantee, that relationship has changed radically. And I mean, and maybe people who advocate for the UBI disagree with me, but I just do feel like that we can end up in a situation where we can implement something like the UBI, and it could largely not have the effects that everybody's expecting it to. And I largely don't expect it to have these effects.
Nick, sorry to interrupt, but I before you close out, I just wanted to ask you a question kind of about what you were talking about regarding work. And sorry for the audience who can't see me. I'm behind the scenes, but so and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to really make sure I was clear on it. I've noticed that you're using an expanded idea of work that is larger than I think most people are used to, as far as what the word work means. So like basically contributing towards your community in ways like being a mother or being a student, which aren't traditionally considered work. But is your proposition that people should be working, and that automation, if we were to find a time where automation where people didn't have to work to survive, that wouldn't be better, or essentially, do you believe that people should be working, contributing to their community, even using their expanded definition, in order to get the things that they need for survival, food, shelter, those things? Or do you think that simply being a human being entitles you to those things, and that we should try to help people become productive members of society, but that we shouldn't predicate their food and shelter on them being productive members of society as we see as a community?
So here's the thing, right? I don't believe in some sort of dictatorial, if you don't work, you don't eat kind of deal, right? Like, I actually don't believe in that. Like, obviously, if somebody sucks and they don't want to do anything, they really don't, they're not interested in contributing to communities, that's fine. Nobody should die because they don't want to work. But at the same time, we want some sort of incentive for people to contribute to community and help it grow and help it prosper. Now, to your point about as automation continues to roll on, I'm just saying, that can be accommodated up until the point where humans aren't needed to work at all, which I doubt we'll ever reach. Now, that's far beyond what we're talking about here. We're talking about where maybe only 10% of the population needs to work, or 5% of the population needs to work.
Well, I mean,
what I would say is, in their respective communities,
work,
they can have job sharing where each person just gives a little bit of time every so often, or they work one day a month, a week a month. Who knows how you can accommodate those things? But those things can be accommodated.
But reducing work is something that you would support. The idea that, like, we don't need to increase the amount of work that's being done in order to make these jobs happen. What we need to do is provide people incomes for jobs that are things like what I think Salam is saying they would pursue with a universal basic income, their passions and their pursuits to better their community with that money in their pocket. You want the federal government to help administrate something along those lines. Am I
Yeah, so now it depends. Now, if
because part of it, you think you need that extra production, and that if people are just given the money, they may not. You're not confident that necessarily that'll be as productive as a centrally planned idea. If that, forgive me if I'm misinterpreting.
Yeah, communally planned, not necessarily centrally planned. Centrally organized, but communally planned. So what I mean by that is basically we're going to give you this many resources to do X, Y, and Z, and you can figure out how to best do what you can with that amount of resources. And basically you would come and say, well, we need a little bit more, we need a little bit less, X, Y, and Z. But how they administer the money will be up to democratic control within that particular community. But to your question about what am I saying about work, I'm saying yes, people that are parents and child rearing should be a paid occupation. If that's your job, that's what you get paid to do. If you want to paint. But I do ask that people who are in the arts, please take some time, if you're an artist, to teach others the craft, to introduce them to your form of art, to enrich society with the knowledge that you've gained, whatever your talents may be. And that's what I would encourage them to do. Now, I know people don't like the idea of mandates, but to be honest with you, the knowledge needs to be passed on, the experiences need to be shared, and that sense of community should be kind of incentivized with that. And I just feel like a UBI leaving our society kind of the way it is with just, a subsidy for everyone given universally, it just may not achieve those goals. I think you need more like an activist role of government deciding the public resources, or giving out public resources and communal control of those resources to decide how they're best used.
And I guess I don't mean to rip off the scab, but my question would then be doesn't this program, the federal jobs program, have the weaknesses of being beholden to the corrupted political system that we're currently participating or engaged with?
Well, I would argue that everything that the government attempts to do, to be honest with you, everything that exists in our society is beholden to that corrupted nature. There's nothing free of it.
But would a UBI
not even our own minds? Would
a UBI not be like? Does it gives them less opportunities to interfere than?
I don't think so.
Okay.
As long as individuals hold the reins of what is produced and how, merely giving someone an income will not change the dynamic between them, someone who demands products, and somebody who supplies them, especially on a large scale. The idea that giving someone an income and that consumption somehow gives you power over somebody who produces is incorrect.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure to get those clarified, because I think partially in the rhetoric in the mix-up, those points might not have been as clear. So I think you did a good job of identifying where you stand with work and the other issues I mentioned. So that's it for me. So.
Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything else in there? Did I mischaracterize anything or?
To me, the thing I'd say is that it appears to me that we all have the same goals. That is, a communally organized, community-based, democratic sort of government and or sort of shape to how our society is organized. And that then people would do whatever broad-based definition of work that would actually be useful and fulfilling and helping in, say, human thriving. And it just comes down to what would be the best way to get to there. And the UBI strikes me as a method that would be about freeing people from certain levels of constraints, whereas the federal jobs guarantee does that in certain ways, but it also gives you that little push to try to emphasize that the communal work is something that we want to base this sort of community-based society around. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to tie both service to community and community together. Like, I think there should be Salam said something. There's a stigma or a shame attached to a program. I think there is no shame in serving one's community. Like, there is no shame in being a teacher. There's no shame in being a firefighter. There's no shame in working for the public sector, providing public goods. And so, I think they both accomplished that goal. I just believe that largely still, without changing the relationship between those who have power and those who do not, without empowering individuals and communities use the public resources for their own purposes, enriching the community, I feel like the UBI kind of lacks in some ways. Now, it may be able to achieve it. I may just be unable to really conceive the full, the fullness of it or its full potential. I do admit that. I'm not clairvoyant, but I do believe that a federal jobs guarantee does accomplish those things much more directly and much more profoundly, and it has much more potential just on its own and what it allows us to do and how it allows us to reshape society, even just reshaping the way we think about things.
To me, it comes down. You go ahead.
No, sorry, David. Just one last comment I wanted to add is that maybe because there are certain concerns that you have, valid concerns. As I said, I'm not as concerned because based on the research that I had. Having said that, there are proposals to have pilots for universal basic income. There's a proposal to have it in Finland, which seems like that it's going to go forward. There's a proposal that it will be in Ontario, Canada, something I'm excited about. And the Greens in British Columbia and the United Kingdom are all calling for that as well. And we will see now that the Greens in British Columbia, they play part in the government, so that these pilot programs might happen to see what happens if we try the universal basic income, and let's see what are the impacts, whether the inflation rate, as you might be concerned about, and I argue that that's not the case, but we can actually practice it and see the end result. Would you support pilot programs?
I will support a pilot program as long as the pilot program is to scale with the program that's to be implemented. So, like, a lot of the pilot programs that have been implemented thus far have been very, very, very small and not of the scale that will require to achieve the goals that you're talking about. If you're talking about people not having to work for subsistence, it's going to have to be much more than both their food requirements, utilities, and food, and things that you need, like a computer, internet, these things. It has to cover all of those things. And I'm just wondering, that kind of scale of UBI has not been tried in the modern world. Now, there have been, small subsidies that have been passed out, $1,000 a month or something like that, but that's nowhere near covering all the expenses that it takes to live.
Right.
So if we are to do experiments, they would have to be of that scale.
I don't disagree. And in reality, a true test is when a country, most likely a Scandinavian one, given the possibly Finland or Norway or one of those, would actually move forward with universal basic income, and the rest of the world will just watch and see how that goes. And based on the result of that program, other countries might follow suit. that's how things typically shape. The reason I'm phrasing it in this format is that basic income seems to be getting closer of actually being, I know you mentioned utopia, but it's actually getting very close of being implemented. And
Yeah,
while I'm a supporter of federal government guarantee, it's a federal job guarantee. I don't see that movement moving at the pace that UBI is currently moving at. So just wanted to know that.
Yeah, I mean, again, of course, I'm making it seem like it would be a smooth and seamless transition. This could be a process that takes well over 20 to 40 years. And this could be a process, like you said, it's up to the whims of how the government works and how active people are in fighting to make sure it's implemented correctly and properly. And then even the mindsets of the people that are fighting for it, because one thing I've learned, and, the left forum has shown me this, that there's something I didn't think about. And I've always kind of been on this the entire time. And I'll talk about it next episode for you guys that are, religious followers of my show. I'll be speaking about it. And that is that when we think about revolutions and change and why sometimes it just has a tendency to replicate what has already existed, it's just in some new form, it is because the minds of the people fighting for that change were not radical enough in their vision, meaning they could not see that the change that they were fighting for would end up re-replicating what they were already in, just in a new mask. And I think people that were fighting to leave feudalism, kind of ran into this when they fell into capitalism. And now we're trying to move out of capitalism, and we kind of fell into like social democracy, which decayed, back into capitalism, which decays back into late capitalism. And we kind of fall back into a neo-feudalism at the very long term, is because we're not able to see that some of the things that we're fighting or some of the things we're trying to do will still replicate the same situations we're trying to leave. And we need to be cognizant of that when we're trying out these solutions. I think that can close it out.
Can I say a couple of things for a couple of minutes?
Huh?
So we got about halfway through my platform about an hour ago. Can I just say like three or four sentences to just wrap up everything else I'm running on? So
yes, please. I'm so sorry.
No, it's not a problem. No, this has been a very interesting conversation. If anybody actually watches to this point in the video, they'll be able to hear. But anyway, so along with universal health care and subsidizing public education, I'm running on sustainable and affordable housing for people making $20 an hour or less. That means subsidizing people who have to spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and building affordable housing that in that range where you can't really get it if you make $16 an hour in where I live, that you can't actually afford housing in any meaningful sense. So we need to build housing, and there's a guy in town who's advocating for tiny homes being built, and I'm supporting him. His name's Dale Dove. And then another thing is that I'm calling that we need to end slavery in our prisons and repeal the exception clause from the 13th Amendment. And the first thing I would do if I was a congressperson is to call for congressional hearings into the 13th Amendment and how it enables slavery to this day. And then I'm calling for getting money out of politics with the constitutional amendment and publicly financed elections. So the election's on June 20.
And where can people find out more about you, or if they want to find about you?
Right. The website is votekulma.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter with Vote KULMA. You can just type into Facebook, David KULMA for Congress. And you can learn more about where we're going. It's 8 days left.
8 days left. The man, one man, music professional, teacher, fighting against a landowner and a tax accountant, or tax lawyer, excuse me. A land developer it's like David versus two Goliaths.
Pretty much. They've raised a whole lot of money. Oh my God.
And I want to implore you guys to remember what I'm talking about here, that, radicalized thinking, that you don't have to necessarily be a corporate tax lawyer or a rich land developer to run for office and to win office and to propose good ideas and to change things in your area, in your community, at the state level, at the municipal level, or even at the federal level. And I want to encourage everybody to go out and support people that are trying to enact changes that will benefit them in their lives. And please, first and foremost, do not wait for somebody to make the change that you want. Be the change. Make the change. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good luck, David.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was this.